Hey there, it's actually been quite a while since I've had the opportunity to make another video, but I decided today that I'm actually going to be reading an essay, and I know I've done this a few times before, but I'm going to be reading an essay that I wrote, um, and I've kind of been on a kick about atheism and having my videos kind of going along that route. After I make this today, I'm going to take a break from that. I think you need to cement the reason why atheism isn't a coherent or reasonable worldview, and I'm going to be going into that a little bit today in reading the essay. But I don't want to get stuck in that. I want to just make the point and move on. So later today, I'm actually going to be making a video on the Trinity, and describing that or explaining that in a way that I think makes a lot of sense. So I want to read the essay that I wrote for some of my friends. It's called "Reason: The Adversary of Atheism." So I'll just get right into it. It won't take more than 5 minutes in a debate with a hardcore atheist to hear that person make the claim that anyone who holds to a belief in God is completely devoid of reason, logic, and common sense. Quite frankly, even those claims are mild compared to other things that are said about those who believe, and I've always wrestled with this issue. Is my belief in God nothing more than a pathetic excuse to have some transcendent purpose to my life? Does believing in God mean that I automatically have tossed reason and logic out the window? Through the years of debates and discussions I've had with atheists, I would not only say that it is entirely reasonable and logical to believe in God, but that holding to a belief where there is no God destroys anything that even resembles reason. Now, before we can make any claim about what is reasonable or logical, we have to define it. But that's the key issue, isn't it? When at any point in human history did we all collectively agree on anything, much less how reason and logic ought to be defined? This is where atheism runs into a brick wall. The foundation of the atheistic worldview argues that we are all that there is, and we must be the ones who define what reason is. We must be the ones that define morality or any other number of terms. But if we really are all that there is in terms of reason and logic, how do we know that we've arrived at the correct definition of reason and logic? Those terms are just as subjective as morality in an atheistic framework. Ravi Zacharias illustrated this fact well by arguing that if you were driving a car up to a stop sign and began to apply the brakes, you could judge if your car was actually slowing by seeing a stopped car in your line of vision. If you're moving past the car, then clearly you aren't stopped. Now, if no car were stationary nearby, you would have to look at a tree or a lamppost or something to see if you were coming to a stop. But Ravi then asked what would happen if the tree started moving too. You would have no way of knowing if you were coming to a stop or if you needed new brakes. Atheists have the exact same dilemma in attempting to define reason, logic, or any other number of terms. Like the car, we are all moving and have nowhere to anchor our terms or to know if we are right in how we define them, if in fact we are all there is in this universe and there are no absolutes. Now, another issue that not only atheism but logic apart from God or apart from a framework where you're arguing for God is this belief we have that a majority opinion shapes what is reasonable. And that may not just be limited to atheism, because I know even still today the majority of people believe in God, and I mentioned that here later on. But just this belief that, and it goes along with the logic of atheism, that if we are all that there is, and we're the ones that define these terms, define morality, reason, logic, all those terms, then it's really just salvation by survey is something. I think the way Ravi put it is that, if a majority of people believe a certain way, then that must make it moral or must make it right. And that doesn't work from the Christian side of it, and it doesn't work from the atheist side of it. Just because a Christian would say, gay marriage is wrong, that doesn't in and of itself make it wrong, just because a majority of people would argue for that, any more than the other side arguing for gay marriage, just because a majority of people may think that, and that kind of seems to be where the trend is moving today, that would make that moral. Everything has to be anchored in an absolute, and if it isn't anchored in an absolute, then you aren't planning your terms or defining your terms in anything concrete, and it doesn't make any sense. So, but just going with that majority opinion shapes reason or shapes logic, and showing why that isn't true, especially for atheism. Um, Even though admittedly we have a number of different definitions of who God is today, there's no question that the overwhelming majority of us collectively still believe in God. To believe that there is no God despite what most people believe is to argue that reason is not defined by us or by what we think or by what a majority of people would argue. Militant atheists like Richard Dawkins really don't want you to believe that we define what's reasonable and logical based on what most of us believe about those terms. They want you to define reason as they define it. They want you to define logic as they define it. But in this world where apparently everything is moving and nothing is anchored in an absolute, why on earth should we define reason as atheists define it? Why should I trust that an imperfect being holds the keys to perfect reason? My argument is that if there were no absolutes, my belief in God is just as valid and reasonable as an atheist's belief that there is no God. Now, they would most certainly disagree, but why? Because as much as they verbally deny it, there is nowhere to run for atheists from the fact that truth is absolute. Essentially, atheists want us to buy into the minority view about God, but the only way they can argue against the minority view of God's existence is to argue for an absolute that can only come from Him in the first place. In buying into the lie that we are all there is, so many atheists have neglected a simple yet very real truth. Our logic and reason is limited to what we have the ability to know. It's incredibly arrogant to assume that unless something fits inside our tiny understanding of what we think is reasonable, that it must not be reasonable. The fact of the matter is that many things are simply beyond our reason. That doesn't make those things unreasonable. Once again, Robbie has another profound thought to add. God has put enough into this world to make faith in Him a most reasonable thing, but He has left enough out to make it impossible to live by sheer reason alone. This line of thought reminds me of a verse in the Bible, Isaiah 55:8. It says, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord." With God, we have a reason to trust that our minds, being created by an omnipotent being, have the ability to arrive at reason. We are also justified in believing that our understanding of reason and logic is true because it's rooted in an absolute that can only stem from that omnipotent being. Without God, our reason is anchored in midair. We have to submit our definitions of all the terms that are so vital to life to the ever-changing views of humanity. Furthermore, we have to trust a mind that was put together by a random process with no designer behind it. I would never buy a laptop that wasn't put together by an intelligent mind, and I'm not going to buy the idea that we weren't either. I don't have that much faith. The ability to be a reasonable and logical person and believe in God at the same time is not only a possibility, it's vital to even being able to argue that reason is something that we can know at all. And I want to add just another thought to that. When you look at any political system today, or you look at any group that would disagree with the opposite group that has a differing viewpoint, especially in America politically, and I'm sure it's true in other political systems today, but because I'm an American, that's more on the forefront and something I see constantly, is that you will get Democrats telling Republicans that they are limiting reason, limiting rights, and in their views they are illogical and stupid and aren't thinking. And you'll get the same thing from Republicans saying to Democrats, what you believe is stupid, you're wrong, you're being a dumb liberal, things like that. And I'm not trying to make a political statement there, because I don't like getting into politics, but I'm just making the point that you have two sides attacking the other or saying that they're not being reasonable or logical, but none of that is anchored in anything but the opinion of each side. That's all that it's anchored in. It's a group of people saying, well, that's unreasonable and illogical, and of course, Republicans who agree with that would say the same thing, would agree that they're being, that the opposite viewpoint are being illogical and unreasonable. But that doesn't mean that it's rooted in anything. That just means that a group of people agree on that. That doesn't make it an absolute. That doesn't make it the absolute definition. And especially when an atheist or a group of atheists say that Christians or anyone who believes in God are completely devoid of reason, it's not that they're devoid of the definition of reason, it's that they don't have your definition of reason. they don't have your view of what's reasonable and logical, and I don't need your view, especially in a framework where there are no absolutes. I can just believe whatever I want. But the fact of the matter is that there are absolute definitions for these terms, and as an atheist, if you try to argue for those or argue against the majority opinion in the world, you're arguing for an absolute that you claim you don't believe in the first place. So I just wanted to share those thoughts with you, and I'm definitely going to move on for a while from the atheistic worldview and showing why that isn't a coherent or reasonable view to have, and why it leaves so many gaps and so many issues that just make it illogical to believe in, and illogical because there is a definition of what that is, and it's not found in atheism. So I just wanted to make that statement, and I'll be making another video later today. Thanks.